design as an ecosystem. I don't know about you, but I have no idea what this means, and so I had to seek a bit of clarification from the organisers. It says on the blurb that the boundaries between built environment disciplines are blurring, and the divide between each of these industries and the client and the end user is more narrow than ever. I don't know how many of you remember the movie The Life of Brian, but there's a point in that when Pontius Pilate is trying to find the real Brian, and everyone's saying, "My name's Brian, and my name's Brian," and someone says, "My name's Brian, and so's my wife." It's a bit like project management these days. Everyone's a project manager, and I'm sure with these guys they will also agree that everyone is an architect. The clients know better than you, the builders know better than you. It's a bit of a challenge, and it's really a symptom of the 21st century and things happening fast, money being less, pressures being greater. So today we're going to explore that topic in a little bit more depth, looking at our respected panels' relative experience, because they all come from slightly different aspects of the creative field. I'll introduce them one by one as they start to talk, rather than all now. And each person will talk for 5-10 minutes. And at the end of that, we will throw it open for a discussion. These things are much more successful, and you'll get a lot more out of it if we can have a genuine conversation about the issues that are thrown up, rather than just a Monday evening Q&A type session. So first up, we've got Koichi Takada. Koichi is a member of the new generation of architects that aim to naturalise architecture in the urban environment, an approach he developed after living in cities of high urbanisation, Tokyo, New York and London. Sydney-based Koichi Takada Architects was established in 2008, celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. Koichi just told me he has 50 staff, which I was pretty impressed by. Through a series of award-winning designs, the growing practice is gaining an international reputation and is about to change the skylines of Sydney, Brisbane, Tokyo, Los Angeles and Mexico City. Recent projects include Crown Group's Infinity at Green Square, a $525 million futuristic mixed-use development, shaped like a giant loop nicknamed the Donut. Another is Arc in Sydney CBD, the 22-storey building podium with a series of layered brick masonry arches and public rooftop gardens in striking, curved white rib cages. So, without further ado, Koichi, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Max. So it's interesting, when I read the question, I was overseas and I just returned and tried to understand after overcoming my jet lag, and then still can't understand the question. So I rang Max and said, Max, I really don't understand the sort of question or intent of this discussion. And because I think when you read more and more, blurring boundary, I suppose, or how we work together as different disciplines and expertise, pretty much traditional sense has been there for many, many years. And I suppose use of technologies and I suppose we strive to improve the way we work together. And more and more think whether you work integrated or separately, within a local context or international context, for me, the way we approach, I suppose, the design of architecture hasn't changed. So this is how we do it. Myself, if I introduce myself, I was once labeled as bad boy of architecture in Sydney, and I was troubled by it because, I suppose my nature being Japanese and I'm very nice and honest and humble personalities, and I was shocked to see that in a public domain. However, the reason why I've given that label is that we push the boundary. We love pushing the boundary. We like the approach in such a way that we want to create the point of difference. The types of project that we do, I don't know whether you're familiar with my practice project. People call it, I don't like the word iconic, but let's call it sort of a landmark. People call it iconic. We create point of difference. I like the approach to think that we're adding value to it. But anyhow, so we grow this reputation locally, and then now we're going overseas. And there's still this sort of the same reputations, and I can sort of present example from, I suppose, Qatar. We're doing this project for Qatari royal family, and they're one of the, I suppose, the wealthiest clients you can work for. So it's massively privileged, and I just came back, and it's an amazing building designed by Jean Nouvel. We won this international competition to do the 6 parts of interiors. So this was really interesting. This really pushed us to talk about this, I suppose, the team spirit and how you actually built up these different disciplines together to approach this project. And of course, we do want to do the best job, but overseas in scenario, and given, I suppose, there's no limitation of budget, you really must put together the best team. And I said, well, let's bring the Australian consortiums. It's about 12 consultants with us. Sort of went to present to royal family. So this sort of, this was really key to success of this project, or I suppose the winning the project against all the superstar architects that competed each other internationally speaking. And I think the model that I like to use is, if I may use the movie reference again, Ocean 11. I love Ocean 11. I said, people ask me how you put together different discipline, how you blow the boundary between the discipline, all this. I think the Ocean 11 you can actually learn a lot from. And I like to think playing a role of architects. I suppose I'm a George Clooney. And
how did we know that?
Although I'm tempted to be a Brad Pitt, but never mind. George Clooney is happy, middle ground. But anyhow, this sort of a role that he played, Danny Ocean, he's a charismatic and a man of action. And he put together these teams, and I think following the 3 rules. I don't remember the 3 rules, so let me read this. So the 3 rules: don't hurt anyone. The second one: don't steal from anyone who doesn't deserve it. The third one: play the game like you've got nothing to lose. And this is what architects do, I think, in some way. And for us, we approach this sort of types of caliber project as if we had nothing to lose. And then the team in blowing especially the boundaries is really important in terms of creating a relationship, not just with the clients, but in between, among the consultancy. And my role, I think, I keep reminding myself as an architect, as a man of action, is to keep talking about the global picture. I think when we start working, and I may add to sort of a time constraint of a different project, to deliver architecture is a long process. I mean, minimum big project here, we spent 3-4 years. This project in Qatar has been 8 years in making. So it's, you need to really sustain the relationship. It's not just talking about being a good relation with other consultants and other disciplines. It's a really full-time work just to maintain that good relationship. But what I do is that I keep reminding what is the end games, what is the end goals, what is the big picture that we all trying to achieve together. And I think there's a lot of things, I suppose, in Ocean 11, they all come together for the one purpose. And then I think for us as an architects, whether you look at, trying to achieve something that is, I suppose, iconic in terms of design-wise, whether you're trying to achieve in terms of sustainability, you're trying to give back to community, community building, all this is really important to set, as a goal. So that's what I do, and I think increasingly, I think today's you look at every disciplines and every aspect of services that we offer as a professionals, and I think you would share it, are becoming really confusing, and there's so many options available to us, and it could confuse us. So this is the way that I try to orchestrate, just like as opposed to George Clooney play Danny Ocean, keep reminding people why we do what we do. And I suppose that this sort of symposium that is a good sort of a place to ask and remind ourselves why we do what we do, and why we're in these professions, and how we're trying to sort of use the best skill sets to achieve our goals.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ashley Dennis. Ashley is a senior associate and one of Krone's leading designers. He delivers innovative architectural and urban design outcomes across a range of scales and building typologies, both locally and internationally. He has been instrumental in the design and delivery of significant civic buildings and precincts, including the 217 Pullman medal-winning Orange Regional Museum, the Connection at Rhodes, and most recently, Rocky Hill Memorial Museum in Goulburn. Ashley's design processes deliver contextually sensitive, process-driven and performance-based outcomes with an emphasis on integrated architecture, urban design and landscape through collaboration. Ashley's boss is in the audience as well, so he's going to give you a really good talk. Over to you.
Thanks, Max. Just picking up kind of where Koichi left off, and I picked up on this word confusion, and I think it's really interesting talking about confusion relative to the topic, which is the blurring of specialists within the industry. And I think there's kind of two ways to think about it, and in some ways blurring has more of a negative connotation, and then perhaps something like alignment would have more of a positive connotation. And so, you know, throughout my career and working across multiple scales, I can say that I can put some projects in the kind of blurring of roles basket, and others in the alignment of the project team generally, and obviously they're the ones that in some ways have the best outcomes. I think kind of also the premise of the conversation that these roles are blurring, you know, project managers or architects. We're using our BIM and our CAD models to be used for facilities managers, so on and so forth. And then through that, it's kind of benefiting the end stage of projects. So I think definitely the alignment is there in the later phases of architecture and the construction industry. But what I'm more interested in is how do we get that alignment earlier in the formative phases of the project. And I think that kind of sets up the whole project moving forward. So for myself, working across a range of different building scales and building typologies over the last couple of years, it's easy for me to sort of compare and how the different scales affect the alignment, and also the way in which the team is engaged, I think, has a huge bearing on the alignment. So if I think about, say, a smaller civic scale project like Orange or like Rhodes, Krone were engaged along with a full consultant team. We had the community engagement process in place. We had clear lines of communication to the client, to the community, and to our specialists. And so to unpack that, it's really simple. We all kind of work together from the start, and I think there's no images of that project here, but it's obvious that it is a true collaboration between landscape architects, the community, and the client. Whereas I think if we then talk about you know, larger scale commercial projects where the stakes are higher, we're moving into a realm where design excellence processes are really driving the way architects and designers win work, and it's very different. So, you know, City of Sydney, Parramatta, Brisbane, Melbourne, we've been involved in design excellence competitions over the last couple of years all around Australia. And I think it's definitely benefiting the architectural landscape of cities, but there's possibly lines of communication that haven't yet kind of been overcome. So, say in City of Sydney, 4 or 5 teams are asked to join a design excellence competition. The brief is generated somewhat in isolation by the client and by the city, and then that's presented to prospective teams to respond to, essentially. They go away in a silo for 4 to 6 weeks, generate a design outcome with really limited interaction with the client, and then come back and have to present to a jury who's not the client as well as the client. And so there is this kind of second guessing. And so even though the stakes are much higher and these are huge projects, I think in that instance, potentially the client and the end user are the ones who are taken out of play early. And then after that process, it's a little bit of catch up to get back to kind of the client's ambitions, or aligning of ambitions, if you like. And I think I've seen instances where that's really positive, and the result for the client is something so unexpected, and perhaps if they were there driving it, they wouldn't have kind of got that outcome, positive outcome that was beyond their expectations. And then other instances where perhaps they feel like they've been not stuck with, but the result isn't in line with what their ambitions were. So I think there is sort of this level of emergence that needs to happen early in the concept phase, where the outcome is greater than the sum of all the parts, or all the people involved. And then it's not just the blurring of specialists, it's also the blurring of international lines. So how do we collaborate on competitions with parties out of Europe, America, and Asia? And they've got different ways of working, and similarly clients internationally. And so the ecosystem, if you like, starts to have all these introduced species that then have to negotiate the same path, and it does become quite complex. So I don't think there's necessarily, I'm not saying that direct engagement versus design excellence competitions is good or bad, but they're just two different processes that we're negotiating, and the design excellence process is something that's fairly new, and so I can already see it adapting and finding ways to get it right in the first instance.
Thanks very much. I'd like to come back to the design excellence. I know it's a slightly sensitive topic in many respects because it's so fraught with political intrigue, but we'll come back to that in the questions. Our next speaker is Simone Oliver, who is a principal at Architectus. Simone is responsible for driving the overall strategy, business development and project delivery of the workplace and interior architecture team. With a career spanning 25 years, Simone has led creative teams to develop award-winning workplace, hospitality and learning communities for some of the world's foremost companies and institutions. Working closely with clients, Simone creates smart and beautiful signature environments that are characterised by an approach that celebrate the human condition and support transformational change in the way people think, feel and act. The tangible benefits to her clients often lie in increased engagement by users in learning, knowledge sharing, in health, well-being and workplace happiness. Clients include Westpac, Qantas and the Reserve Bank of Australia. All yours.
Thanks, Max. I thought we'd go back to the topic again, which is design as an ecosystem, and part of the explanation of that, and I called Max's work, I wasn't quite sure, was this idea of radical symbiosis. And so I actually looked up symbiosis. I knew the word but wasn't quite sure what the definition was, but it's about having an interdependence on somebody else. And so going back to the movie analogy, you know, it's the idea in Finding Nemo of, you know, Nemo had that dependency, I suppose, on his sea anemone as his home. When I think about Finding Nemo, though, I don't think I'd probably classify myself as Nemo, but I'd probably be more like Doreen. My team would say she's like Doreen. She has a very short-term memory for what she agrees on and with and how we're moving forward. I thought I'd tell a bit of a story that came out of an interaction that I had with a client. I do have to put my specs on, which I think changed the way in which, certainly the way in which I work, but also the company that I worked with. Once upon a time, a client came to our business with a proposition to design a 30,000 square metre workplace project. Of course, we're very excited about that. And they said to us, okay, to win this job, you're going to have to perform a charette. Now, I'm sure there are people here who have been put into this position before, but basically they said, you know, the charette is going to be the way in which we decide whether you're right for us. So it's not going to be the fee, and it's not going to be your beautiful portfolio of work, and it's not going to be a whole lot of chatter about your experience. No beauty show, as we call it, no beauty show. It's just going to be a charette. Now, a charette, for anybody who doesn't know what it is basically a moment where you get into a room with your client or with others and you together solve a problem, and you have a time frame around doing that. So as you can appreciate, there is often quite a lot of pressure around how are we going to do this, and it's also the unknown that happens when you go into that room. But of course, the company that I was working with at the time were very well versed in workplace strategy. We'd done a lot of this sort of stuff before, and so we kind of said to ourselves, looking at the competition out there, we said, we're going to nail this. You know, this is right up our alley. We're going to do just great at this. So we got into the work mode of preparing for the charette, and we pulled together our best and brightest. We decided that we'd create some disruption in the room, so we ended up pulling in a couple of people from outside as well. And I remember we had one who was a futurist, and he said, I'm not going to be around for this charette that you're doing. I was like, oh no. But he said, oh, maybe we could Skype me in. And he, as it turned out, he was travelling with his family in Uluru, around Uluru. And so we had this wonderful thing where we had him on the iPad as a sort of a headshot with the rock, you know, in behind. And it was all great. So we thought, this is a great touch, you know, this is going to be great. The charette happened, we got in there, we did what we did best. We walked out and it was all like high fives and yep, we got this, we completely nailed it. The client loved it and so forth. And so we thought we had the job. Over the following couple of days, we got the call from the client, and they said, we'd like you to come back. So we're like, all right, we are on our way to winning this 30,000 square metre project. And we walked into the room and they said, now, and we're like, so how was the charette? Did you enjoy it? And all that sort of thing. And they said, yeah, well, we like you guys. And we think that we need you to do this project. But the charette, that was crap. We're like, oh, okay. Yeah, it didn't go down so well. But what we could do is maybe induct you into our process. And you can imagine we were like, yeah, great, that sounds great. Yeah, we'll do your process. Fabulous, we're collaborative people. So they said, yes, now we're going to have an induction about our process next week. It's going to take a full day. Okay, all right. So we kind of backed out of there, got into the lift, and it was like, what the hell just happened then? You know, they've told us that our process was no good. We have a process that's been generated maybe over the last 40 years in strategy. We're famous for this stuff. How could they possibly think that our process wasn't going to get them to where they wanted to go? Oh, I don't know, doing their process. Does that mean that our fees are going to be affected by this? Yeah, probably. And by the time we got back to the studio, it was like, you know, this job, it's got hairs all over it. Do we really want to go for this? You know, like there's always risk attached to their process. Oh, how are we going to work this out? So, you know, we gave ourselves the benefit of a night's sleep, and the next morning we woke up and we said, you know, looking at the accounts, we think we need to go and get this project. We, you know, need the income. Okay, so we then went through our induction on the process. And the process induction included, I guess, the realisation that firstly we were going to have to take out a space in our studio for the next 6 months that was going to be dedicated to the project, that we were going to be isolating our team into that space. They were not to work on anything else but that project, that we would be in that space with our client. Our client would be part of the process. And over the course of the week, we would be presenting our findings on the project, not one, not twice, but 3 times. So we said to ourselves, so where does it kind of come in that we do, you know, the visuals, we do the drawings, the delivery packages, all the stuff that we usually pull together to impress our clients, to tell them that we're great designers, to tell them that we're in control of the project, we know what we're doing, all that sort of stuff. Well, that actually wasn't going to happen. I can't tell you, for confidentiality reasons, what happened over the next 6 months in that room where we were camping with our client and also our consultants who were also dragged into the process, and our team, where we sat in there in our kind of sphere of radical symbiosis in our very enclosed ecosystem. But I can tell you that our client, without us knowing it, gave us this incredible gift. They had a completely unique way of design thinking, which transcended design and into many products which they produce, which they taught us. And it got to a point where in the process, we were concerned about the next steps because we wanted the information from the client as to how we were going to get to the end of the process. It ended up being an incredible experience for us, and it ended up with an outstanding, I think, project that was the result of that interdependency with the client. I guess just to conclude, there's a bit of a moral to the story. Never really underestimate the new breed of client that you find out there in your ecosystem. You know, the ones who actually think they know more than you do. And, you know, there's a great chance that that client in today's globalised, knowledge-hungry, completely automated world, that they actually will probably know a great deal more than you would expect them to. If my students, and I do go and teach out at UNSW sometimes, I say to my students, you know, don't feel limited by the idea that what you learn in terms of design thinking just takes you into interior design or into architecture. It can take you into working with a bank, working with Deloitte, working with you know, one of the great tech companies. This way of thinking is not actually isolated to just the way we are as designers. Secondly, to innovate, you have to collaborate. That's the end game, I think, in terms of how we work today. It's all about collaboration. And finally, never let the shock of a client in telling you that your process was crap wipe out the words that were said directly beforehand. And they said, we think we really need you. The interdependency or the symbiosis that we can form with our clients can actually bring greater creativity to us, can actually give us more design time because those lines become blurred, can actually create trust which enables a greater and a better sense of communication about the project and ultimately better outcomes. And that's it.
I can't believe you haven't told us the secret part of that. So we're never going to know what this client is. Our final speaker is Andrew Pettifer from Arup. Andrew's role at Arup is New South Wales Region Leader and New South Wales Building Group Leader. He's a building services engineer with extensive international experience in the UK, Europe, Asia, the Middle East and Australia. Andrew has been Arup's project director for a number of landmark projects in Sydney, including 1 Central Park and 50 Martin Place. Which one's 50 Martin Place?
Macquarie Bank.
Okay, very good. He's also led the development of Arup's own workplace project in the client role. This includes the workshop and studios at 201 Kent Street, designed with BVN, and the 7,600 square metre fit-out at Barrack Place, designed with Hassel, which Arup will occupy in October of this year. Andrew believes in achieving sustainable outcomes through clear strategic thinking, delivering pragmatic and practical solutions for clients. He is passionate about the power of effective leadership, great design, and how the two combined can create great places for people.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the engineer. I'm the diversity card. Although, of course, I've been thinking whilst I've been listening to you talk that I think Arup, our founder, wrote about the concept of total design, and really that's what he was talking about in terms of bringing together all of the thinking and of all the different members, at least of a design team. But it seems to me that the what you might call the chain of influence that creates the built environment, particularly in the commercial sector, has traditionally been quite long and quite disjointed. And it starts with the investors, the people with the money. I remember going to a conference. I was asked to speak at a conference of property people. It's about 8 years ago now. And I got there early and I sat and I thought I'd listen and learn about their thinking around buildings and so on. And in fact, for the whole of the morning, nobody mentioned the building, let alone design or people that might use these buildings. They talked about assets, they talked about cap rates, they talked about rate of return and so on. And I realised that there's a whole bunch of people that are influencing the built environment for whom buildings are simply a financial mechanism. And that was really quite a shock to me. And then, so that's where it kind of starts. And then you've got, you've got the developers and the contractors and the designers and the tenant reps and the tenants and finally at the end of this chain, there's the pods who are going to occupy this building and have an experience. And I actually think we're coming round to realising that the experience of the occupants of the buildings is actually what it's about ultimately. And where we can foreshorten or subvert that chain, it seems to me we get better outcomes. And you mentioned that in terms of a civic building where you've got a client who really cares, they're going to look after this building. 50 Martin Place for Macquarie Bank was a remarkable design outcome. I don't know if many of you seen or been to the building or seen what they've done. But one of the reasons they were able to create that was because they're the funder, the owner, the operator, the building manager, and the occupant, and they had this huge pride, and they were able to bring those things together with their consultants to create something remarkable. And I remember one of the things that was talked about when we were designing the intervention of the new glass dome roof was they said, we want this to be a building that in 30 years' time is listed. And I'd never heard a client say that before, so that was kind of pretty interesting. And then in terms of our fit out, of course we don't have, being a humble consultant, we don't have quite the means of our investment banking friends at Macquarie. So we subverted the system somewhat by saying to investor for their building at 151 Clarence, we said to them, well look, if you appoint us to do all the engineering, we'll be your anchor tenant. And they said, well, that's a pretty good deal because we might well have used you anyway. And it got the development away. So 5 years ago, we signed a lease for the building that we're going to occupy in October. But what it did, it foreshortened that chain, if you like, because we were right in there, able to influence the design that we wanted our people and our culture. And the brief I always give to our architects when I work with them is, create me a space that could only be Arup. Or as I like to say, Acon would never have done this. Now, I'm not bagging Acon, they're a perfectly fine organisation, but they've got their culture and we've got ours. And I think it's important that the spaces that we occupy and how we occupy those spaces reflect our cultures. So we very much try to do that in our projects for Arup. So I think finally we've woken up to the idea that buildings are about people. We live in this kind of experience economy now, if you like, and so you see that reflected in the design of buildings. I think the leadership that Australian designers are taking in workplace is world leading, and we see some fantastic examples of really interesting and innovative fit out design. We see the whole wellness agenda now coming to the fore, where we're really interested in the health and wellness of people. We see the yoga spaces and the wellness rooms and all these sort of facilities. And then at a development level, the developers are realising that they need to create places that attract people. And Barangaroo's, whether you love it or hate it, you can't deny that it attracts a lot of people. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of vibe there, even at the weekends and so on. And in our new building, Investor are doing something similar on a smaller scale, actually creating a place that will bring people into the retail and the laneways, and I think what do they call it, the Western Corridor of the CBD, which is 2 doors up from your new building. That whole area is going to become a more vibrant part of the city. But it's about, Investor want to create a development that people want to go to, and we want to create a fit out that people want to go to, because people can work anywhere, anytime now. We say to our staff, here's a here's a laptop, mobile computer, and we're agile working, and we don't clock you in or clock you out. You work where you want, when you want, to meet the needs of our business and our clients. So they don't have to come to the office. So we have to create an office environment whereby they want to come together and enjoy working with each other and collaborating and do all those great things that we do for the benefit of our clients. So I think this sort of experiential thinking is what is helping to foreshorten that chain of influence, if you like. The other point I wanted to make was around the role of the client, and that's been really interesting for me as somebody who spent most of my career as part of a consultant team, to be given the opportunity to be a client. And what I've come to realise, and if I look back through my career, is that the jobs that had really great outcomes had really great clients. Actually, it's the client that makes the biggest difference, because on the whole, we're all professionals. We all went to university and learned how to be an engineer, an architect, or a builder, or whatever your role might be in the chain. But nobody goes to school to learn how to be a construction client. It's something that people kind of fall into. And what I realise about that is that actually it's an exercise in leadership. You're creating a team, as we do within our organisations, it's no different. So how do you get that team to come together and work really effectively together? And I think it's about setting a culture. So it's about setting expectations around behaviour. Things like, we're allowed to fail. In fact, the brief I gave to BVN when we did our pilot fit out, I said, if we don't fail somewhere in here, we haven't pushed the boundaries far enough. And that was cool. We could do that because it was a pilot. We're going to move out in 3 years' time. But so I think the role of the client is really, really important in terms of setting the culture. And I think the clients get the quality that they of outcome that they deserve, if you like. Because if you enable a really great project team to come together and work together in the right sort of culture, then you'll get the right outcomes. And I think, and I'll speak as the engineer on the panel now, and it's a room full of architects. But some people do have the impression that architects are quite difficult to work with, or quite kind of willful, or
No.
And my experience is that I think you get the architect that you deserve if you give an architect a really good brief. And you point them in the right direction, and you let them do their thing, then you'll get a really good outcome. And so I'm preaching this to the converted, I'm sure, because it's a room full of designers and architects. But I guess what I would say is maybe at the beginning of your projects, have a conversation with your client around an expectation of how a client behaves and how a client is going to get the very best outcome from the project by engaging with the teams. So part of it's around procurement and all that sort of harder stuff. Part of it's the soft stuff around how do you create a culture where we can all come together and work really well for a great outcome. So for me, they're the two keys to success that I see now. A really great client and this focus on the end user and how you meet their needs. And that's what's driving good design, particularly in the commercial sector.
Thank you very much. At this point, we've got a bit of time left over. I'd like to throw it out to you all and see if we can create a bit of a conversation around these topics. Does anyone have a question or want to start? While you're thinking about that, I've got one, and I'm in charge, and I'm a project manager, so I can go first. George, question for you. In the George Clooney. In the project you're working on in the UAE, you said that
In Qatar.
In Qatar, you've pulled together the consultant team effectively. Coming again from a project manager's point of view, what does that do for responsibility? How do you manage the implications on your PI, on the team and someone's failings? Is there a structure in place like that, or is it all mates?
Well, I mean, this is a long story, but it was really a difficult process. So first we won the competition, let's say ourselves as an architect. Then we had to put together a team. Then we have to present again. And that process was almost a year and a half. So even if when we have all the PR, everything covered, and we present to them in a, legally, I suppose, from what we can do from Australia and coming from Australia. And we are designing in Australia, not in Qatar. So we did best we can, but some of the consultants been excluded, so we have to then start again and all this. So it was really a difficult process, whether it's the political agenda or, whether the consultant from other parts of politically maybe not have a good relationship, were excluded or included, or it was a very difficult process. And when we got to a stage where it becomes a fee, I suppose the part of the fee negotiation, they did not trust us. So this is another thing, and I still remember, and I wish university had taught me this. And then I think now people like, I suppose architects like Lord Norman Foster or Richard Rogers, all these superstar architects, why they can do the size of project and suppose the caliber project is that they have a financial means within the office. Well, I had only 4 to 6 people. I had no financial means to compete against all these big guns. And nevertheless, the clients loved our design, so they had to tailor-make the contract. And there was one incident was really interesting. They were asking about my age, for instance. And everybody was talking Arabic. I didn't understand what they were talking about. Anyhow, one just broke in English and said, we were just guessing. Everyone was guessing how old you are. So I thought they were joking. So anyhow, so I found out that in a contract, I, as a lead designer, had to have certain years of experience, which I didn't have. I was too young and not qualified for the job. So they had to change it because the royal family loved, I suppose, what we did. So they had to then change their system to adapt to us. So, and another one is that in a fee process, they would need, for the performance bond, that we needed to put, I suppose, the deposit. So to do the job, well, the idea is normally we'll get paid to do the job. We have to actually invest upfront to take the project. And this is where the big guns are able to do, but for us, it was really difficult to do. And it's big figures of money, So it was really interesting. And this was really opened up a lot of challenges, but we all, let's say we overcome the challenges and learned so much lesson. And now we do LA, Mexico. It seems so easy.
Ashley, question for you. I said I wanted to come back to the design excellence competitions. I can see the tremendous benefits in the pure outcome of a building, where you do have the engineers and probably the builder along absolutely from the start. You've got a QS with you. You've got a holistic team that are covering all of those elements. In that process, though, are you losing the pure blue sky 6B pencil creativity because you've got an engineer saying, you can't do that, a beam's going to be too big?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And to be honest, in terms of this whole blurring of specialists, I think it's probably actually the architects who are the most resistant to that coming together for that reason. I think designers still do like to operate in a silo and kind of prove an idea before it's disproven, if you like. So yeah, I think there definitely is a balance, but at the same time, there's potentially missed opportunities, which comes back to the idea of integration versus add-on. So, you know, if a building can be architecture and landscape rather than landscape as an add-on, similarly with sustainability just being an add-on, I think it's timing is everything, and I think also information is key as well. So kind of back to what Andrew was touching on as well, working on a project in a concept phase or a competition where you're given a brief for, say, a hotel before you know who the operator is, or a commercial building before you know who the anchor tenant is. It doesn't have that level of information that actually might be the catalyst for something greater sometimes. And so there's a whole nother kind of conversation around flexibility and adaptability, and are we designing envelopes or are we designing places? And I don't have the answer as to when they should be coming together, but it's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't.
The process isn't quite as you describe it, though. It's not that constrained, because we're involved in these a lot, right? And sometimes we're employed by the client up front before, and to help inform and guide the competition from an engineering point of view, just to make sure there's nothing silly going on. More often than not, we get called up by our architect mates to say, we're doing this competition, can you come and give us a bit of free advice? And actually that's the way the engineering is done on these projects. It's on a win or prayer, you know, and whoever your mates are that might give you some free help. That's the reality of it.
It's been pushed into that, I think, because theoretically it's only the architect who's given the fee in the competition, but as you said, everyone comes together and essentially produce almost a development application within 4 to 6 weeks, and to be able to do that, you really have to expedite the process. And so sometimes you don't actually have the luxury of, you know, the architects.
So are we getting better buildings as a result? I don't feel like we'd ever get another opera house.
I think, yeah.
I think what's interesting about that is, I mean, I came to Australia in 2007, I think it was. Not that long after that process had started, and you know, the reality is, you know, we've now got our Foster's buildings, and we've got our Rogers buildings, and there's a lot of international. You know, we've got our Jean Nouvelles, and possibly we wouldn't have had those. Now, is that a good thing? Is another question. But I think there's some fine buildings that have come about through having some world-class architects come to Sydney, which, of course, we're only just starting to see that in Melbourne. So maybe you can contrast the two. Is it good for the architectural fraternity in Sydney that this has been happening? Yeah. Not sure it is, but I think we've got some remarkable buildings.
I mean, I from an interiors perspective, you know, to me, if you're working on a project which is 80,000 square metres or 60,000 square metres, it's the only way to work. Like, I have never really gone into, in more, I'd say, recent years, gone into a large project without having all the team on board from the outset, and it's not just the consultants. I mean, it's the suppliers as well. It's about having great minds who have got years and years of R&D in terms of human behaviour and how particular products work and so forth. To be able to bring that dialogue into the conversation from day one, I think is a really powerful thing. And it's just about having people on board who are experienced, know what they're talking about, and are leaders in their own sphere, to be able to bring about outcomes that are differentiated as a result of everybody being on board. By having, say for example, the engineer come in late, maybe you're going to get more obstacles because they'll be more thinking, oh, what can be done? To have the engineer come in and actually know the DNA of the project, actually know the vision, be a part of that, I think sets up a different mindset for the team, and with that can come great thinking around design.
I like your point though about the supply chain as well. I remember when we did 50 Mile in Place, right? They'd appointed Multiplex before they had a DA, and then as we were working through the design, so we were doing all the engineering services, we were able to test our design against what the subcontractors' view was, because they were lined up as well, right? So we actually ended up changing the design of the mechanical system based on the feedback, the experience, and the buildability advice of the subcontractor. Right? And I'm very happy to tell everyone that that's the case. The outcome wasn't just because Arup sat in the office and did this fantastic design. It's because we engaged right through the supply chain, got everybody's input, and we've got a fantastic outcome. To me, that's what design should be about.
We have a question up here. Ashley?
Thanks. I think that scale is interesting. I think in terms of the alignment or blurring of specialists, I blame, renovation TV shows to the point where everyone's an expert, and so a lot of the time when you're having to build in flexibility, adaptability, predict the market, then we revert back to the same more often than not. And but in terms of providing a product that's specifically for a client, I think at that scale it becomes even more important in a way. And I'm actually going through that process at the moment. In a way, my wife is the client, and so I can sort of relate, and I'm having to balance that future-proofing and flexibility against something that's, I guess, a little bit different to a point.
Koichi, you've done a bit of small-scale residential work, I think, in the past.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, end user is always important. I think, I suppose, my design is not a goal. I think the goal is to really provide the space that gives a better lifestyle, better quality of living, let's say in a residential context. And obviously give back to, in a bigger building, the public domain. I think it's been really a massive focus. And we judge, I suppose, the outcome of design, not so much of how much we beautify it or how much we decorate it, but based on how people use it, how people love it. Andrew talked about, these elements as well, but really about how to humanize architecture. And I think that's the part that we really care. And I suppose the other thing is that I think it's sort of a bit of becoming a trend, collaboration, people. We all talk about people, but not many people talk about nature. And nature's been there. And obviously sustainability and greening of cities is really a massive issue. And I think we looked at, I was in Europe, was really hot, and Madrid was 46 degrees. Then I went to Qatar, was 50 degrees. They don't say 50 degrees, by the way, because it creates a psychological problem with the people. And so they say 49, that's where. But anyhow, I mean, you experience all these conditions. It's really a serious issue. And while we all talk about people, how we all make us all happy, there's other things that really suffering, and without this environment, we would not live. So, I mean, these are the other things that, we start to address it seriously through architecture, our project as example. And so that's really, I mean, that's how we approach it. But I think also the process, I think we need to go back to that outcome, the end games that also, Simone talked about. I think we really must really look at that. And the success or fail, we must succeed in these areas. We can't fail. So from that, the pressure is massive, and we really need to go back to outcome, talk about outcome more, because I think there was a lot of emphasis on the process, but no one really judged the outcome anymore, So I think that we really need to go back to that.
And good design is applicable across all areas, I would argue. An automotive designer doesn't necessarily know who's going to be driving their car. They'll just do a good one. One last question and we must wrap it up.
This is probably just an extension of that discussion, in that would you not have a vision of what you want to create when you have the key objective, and then you have a character building of the end user, so that you eventually attract a particular person for whom you have created a space. So you're going to have to do the homework as to what you would typically say would be your target occupant or your target market, and then design to attract that particular end user. So it's almost flipped.
I think what's changed is it's very much come down to the sort of more so the individual. So we might have thought in the past in a commercial building, we want to attract, I don't know, HSBC or CBA or somebody. But I think it's gone down to that level of what do those individuals within those organisations kind of want. But you're right. I mean, okay, so what do they want? And they want to be able to, do their dry cleaning on the way home, or have a little, place where they stop for dinner, or whatever it may be. But I think it's gone to that finer grain now. The other point I just wanted to make on what you were talking about, or brought up for me, was around the spaces between the buildings. And I think there's a lot of focus on that. My experience and the feedback we get from the design competitions, and we're party to a lot of them, is that it's normally what happens to the ground plane that wins. At the glory shot of the facade and all the rest of it but the story is around how does this knit into the city and the urban fabric and so on. And then something that's becoming really important in that regard, and certainly City of Sydney are absolutely focused on this, is around the microclimate. So whether you get sunlight and wind. Wind is a huge issue, obviously in the urban environment. So I think there's much more focus now on the quality of the spaces between the buildings, which can only be a good thing.
But that needed to happen, though, didn't it? I mean,
oh yeah.
The Dula International Symposium last week down in Melbourne, there was a huge focus from all the international architects who all said the same thing. That that Melbourne over the last couple of decades have focused so much on the individual buildings themselves, but the podiums were anti-pedestrian. They were just militarized blocks. It scared pedestrians the other side of the street, and then particularly along South Bank itself, on City Road, and that was one of the massive focuses on every single competition entry, where you had to invite the community back in to the space as opposed to scare them away.
Okay, right.
It's something, and you pointed out to it with the City of Sydney, Circular Quay was a huge focus, where the planning permission wasn't even granted unless they were willing to adopt the community interaction as part of a phased project for subsequent projects going on down the line.
Indeed.
And
So it's a good thing.
And I think also too, it's, from that ground plane perspective, it's not just about the architecture alone. I mean, it's also about the cultural programming of those environments. That's why Barangaroo is successful. If you were to look at just the three buildings alone and the great big vast you know, podium. It's like, really?
Yeah, I know.
But it's the fact that that international towers actually have an incredible cultural programming that happens around that environment and the events and the happenings that happen there
And
that actually draw people in.
Frasers have done the same at Central Park.
That's right.
And
so
even
it
through
has
the
to go hand
construction
in hand,
process, you know, using spare spaces, you know, handing it over to community for art and, you know, just keeping the whole thing kind of going from a cultural point of view.
I'm afraid at that point we have to wrap it up, guys. We've got another one coming in. So I'd like to thank Koichi, Andrew, Ashley and Simone for their contribution. Thank you very much.